Good morning, everyone. It is currently January 31st, 2025 at 10:20 hours. That's 10:20 a.m. Today we shall be reading Unintended Consequences by John Ross, Part 2M, Growth Continued. For this recording session, we will be picking up at the start of page 312 of the ebook edition, corresponding to page 362 of the hardcover edition, at the start of the section entitled May 28th, 1974. Beginning now. This is Unintended Consequences by John Ross, Part 2M, Growth Continued, Chapter 101, Load Dynamics and Valedictorians. Dated May 28th, 1974. May 28th, 1974. Damn, Ray Johnson thought as the sound of his client's 375 H&H, that is 375 Holland and Holland, rang out, and he watched a piece of hide fly off the Cape Buffalo's left foreleg. How could he miss it 10 yards? The man lowered the rifle to poor arms and stared open-mouthed at the 1,700-pound animal he had just wounded, and consequently made very, very angry. He made no effort to work the bolt and chamber another round. "Shoot! Shoot, damn it!" Ray screamed at his client, who stood frozen, 15 feet to the side of the professional hunter. The buffalo instantly lowered its head, turned towards the cause of his irritation, and charged. The man then did something Ray Johnson had never seen anyone do before. Al Holbrecht turned in panic, dropped his rifle, and ran. Ray Johnson was so stunned at his client's action that he was half a second slow getting the front sight of his .458 Model 70 on the enraged bull, even though the butt of his rifle was already on his shoulder. The buffalo was passing right to left in front of Raymond's muzzle. The Winchester thundered, and even as he slapped the bolt rearward, Raymond knew that by the time he got off a second shot, the adrenaline-filled animal would have overtaken his panicked customer. As Ray simultaneously hauled the rifle down out of recoil with his left hand and slammed the bolt forward with his right, he saw with amazement that the bull was down, 5 or 6 feet past where he had been when Raymond pulled the trigger. He was not dead yet, but his hindquarters were all that would function. Both of the buffalo's shoulders were obviously shattered. Ray put his second shot through the animal's heart and lowered his rifle. He glanced to his left and saw that the steel company president was still running. Christ, hope he stops pretty soon, Raymond thought with a shake of his head. There's a ravine in that direction, less than 1.5 miles away. Good shot, his lead tracker said simply as he jogged over to inspect the dead beast. Yeah. It was the first time Ray Johnson had used Henry Bowman's ammo to stop a charge. It would not be the last. This is Unintended Consequences, Chapter 101, Load Dynamics and Valedictorians, dated May 28th, 1974. Damn, Ray Johnson thought as the sound of his client's 375 Holland and Holland rang out, and he watched a piece of hide fly off the Cape Buffalo's left foreleg. How could he miss at 10 yards? The man lowered the rifle to port arms and stared open-mouthed at the 1,700-pound animal he had just wounded and consequently made very, very angry. He made no effort to work the bolt and chamber another round. "Shoot! Shoot, damn it!" Ray screamed at his client, who stood frozen, 15 feet to the side of the professional hunter. The buffalo instantly lowered its head, turned towards the cause of his irritation, and charged. The man then did something Ray Johnson had never seen anyone do before. Al Holbrecht turned in panic, dropped his rifle, and ran. Ray Johnson was so stunned at his client's action that he was half a second slow getting the front sight of his .458 Model 70 on the enraged bull, even though the butt of his rifle was already on his shoulder. The buffalo was passing right to left in front of Raymond's muzzle. The Winchester thundered, and even as he slapped the bolt rearward, Ray knew that by the time he got off a second shot, the adrenaline-filled animal would have overtaken his panicked customer. As Ray simultaneously hauled the rifle down out of recoil with his left hand and slammed the bolt forward with his right, he saw with amazement that the bull was down, 5 or 6 feet past where he had been when Ray pulled the trigger. He was not dead, but his hindquarters were all that would function. Both of the buffalo's shoulders were obviously shattered. Ray put his second shot through the animal's heart and lowered his rifle. He glanced to his left and saw that the steel company president was still running. Christ. Hope he stops pretty soon, Raymond thought with a shake of his head. There's a ravine in that direction, less than 1.5 miles away. Good shot, his lead tracker said simply as he jogged over to inspect the dead beast. Yeah. It was the first time Ray Johnson had used Henry Bowman's ammo to stop a charge. It would not be the last. Elsewhere, Richard Westcott Gaines, the valedictorian announced, and Richard stepped to the podium and took the proffered diploma. A cheer rose from a group of friends seated in folding chairs on the university lawn. "Oh man, he's got it knocked," one of them said in admiration. "What do you mean? I thought his grades sucked, like almost flunking out." "Oh, you didn't hear?" the first asked in surprise. "Some congressman where he lives got him a spot. His GPA doesn't matter." "A job?" "Oh, no. Nah, state." "A state? Not a state senator. What's the other one? A state representative." He laughed. "Get this. He only has to go in 4 days a week from January to May, and he doesn't actually have to do anything except sit around and listen. Not even that, really. Just vote sometimes on stuff. And for 5 months, he's going to get more than I'm going to get in a whole year at Monsanto." "Shit! How do I get a job like that?" "Beats me. Blow somebody, I guess." The two young men stopped discussing Richard Gaines's future when they saw that another of their friends was about to have his name called. In point of fact, Richard Gaines did not yet actually have the state rep position his friends referred to, as the election was not until November. When that time came, however, Congressman Sloan would indeed make good on his promise, and Richard Gaines would represent a district in South St. Louis. The rest of the young man's description of Gaines's future was reasonably accurate, although his estimate of the monetary benefits was on the low side. Elsewhere, "Well, I'm going to head back to the hotel until it's time for dinner," Catherine Bowman told her son. "Are there any of your friends that can join us? Or do all of them have plans with their parents?" Henry's mother liked being able to include her son's friends when they were available. "Marty's parents have to go do something or other that he wants to avoid like the plague. Let me find him and see if he wants to use us as an excuse to beg off on whatever they've got plotted. I think Jeff's free too." He looked around the quadrangle at his black-robed classmates, trying to spot either or both of his friends. A number of the graduating seniors had shucked their commencement robes and were sporting purple shirts emblazoned with the slogan, "Right is okay," to show that they weren't ashamed for graduating without writing an honors thesis. "Well, you go carouse with your friends for a while, and then give me a call at the hotel and tell me how many, so I can phone in the reservations." Henry smiled at his mother's turn of phrase. "If you're out, I'll leave word at the front desk," he promised. "Oh, and I lugged this up here for you. It just came to the house, and I thought it might be important." Henry's mother opened her purse and withdrew a letter-sized envelope, and Henry smiled at the idea of her lugging it up to Massachusetts for him. When he saw the return address in the absence of postage, his pulse quickened. "Department of the Treasury, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, NFA Branch, Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., District of Columbia, 20226. "My Class 3 license!" he exclaimed as he tore open the envelope. "Thought it might be important," Catherine Bowman commented, deadpan. Henry scanned the enclosed sheet and saw that they had cashed his check, and his status as a special occupational taxpayer would begin effective July 1st. the first day of the fiscal year that had been created with the passage of the National Firearms Act in June of 1934. "Yes," he said under his breath as he reread the document. "First time anyone in our family was excited about mail from the government," his mother said dryly. "See you around 7, she said as she kissed him goodbye. Henry Bowman had just graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in both geology and economics, and he had 3 firm job offers. The one he expected to accept was with an independent firm outside St. Louis that did a lot of contract work for the oil companies, and whose president had complained that his geologists, quote, still didn't understand that they've been hired to help the firm make money, not to look for fossilized Indians or some damn thing. At that moment, however, Henry Bowman was not thinking about geology or economics. He was contemplating the fact that he had just been licensed by the feds to deal in machine guns. New chapter here. Beginning here on page 314 of the ebook edition, corresponding to page 365 of the hardcover edition, we have chapter 102, Shotgun News, dated December 18th, 1974. Okay, let's do the readie. Chapter 102, Shotgun News, dated December 18th, 1974. Henry Bowman was not thinking about guns or shooting as he tossed the bulk rate envelopes in the trash and divided his first-class mail into bills and everything else. He was reviewing in his mind if there was anyone on his Christmas list he had neglected when his telephone rang. "Hello?" "Henry, it's Ed. Glad I caught you, man. Have you seen the latest Shotgun News?" Ed Barber was referring to a publication that came out twice a month. It was 96 pages of newsprint published in Hastings, Nebraska, which was composed entirely of classifieds and display ads for firearms and firearm-related products. Yeah, it's here, but I haven't looked at it yet." "Well, you'd better get on it. Some guy's got a 4-bore for sale." "What?" Henry almost screamed. "I think he's a dealer. It's in the classified section under Rifles for Sale. I don't have my copy in front of me, but it's a Rhoda. The ad said both barrels were fully rifled, and the gun weighed 24 pounds. "Hang on a minute, I'll call you back," Henry said quickly and hung up the phone. It took him 4 minutes to find his most recent copy of Shotgun News, turn to the Rifles for Sale section, and locate the 1-inch ad. The ad reads as follows: RB Rhoda 4-bore double rifle, 24-pound back-action under-lever hammer gun built in 1880 to 1882. Brown Damascus barrels, fully rifled, mint bores. RB Rhoda 4-bore double rifle, 24-pound back-action under-lever hammer gun built between 1880 and 1882. Brown Damascus barrels, fully rifled, mint bores, beautiful engraving, elephants, rhinos, lion, original case. Some loading tools, not original. Serious inquiries only. No collect calls. Contact Jim, 603-217-5543 after 6 p.m., that's 1800 hours, Eastern Standard Time, 1-75. Jim, 603-217-5543 after 6 p.m. / 1800 hours Eastern Standard Time, 1-75. Henry stared at the ad and looked at the date at the top of the page. Damn. I hope this issue hasn't been out long. He was kicking himself for not skimming through it as soon as it had arrived in his mailbox. The Rhoda was the only 4-bore he had ever seen advertised in the Shotgun News. "Hello?" The man answered on the 4th ring. Yes, sir. I'm calling about the ad you ran in Shotgun News about a Rhoda double rifle for sale. Do you still have it, or has it been sold?" "Well, fellow said he wanted it for sure, but didn't have the money just yet. Told him I'd give him till noon on Friday." "I see," Henry said. "The day after tomorrow. What can you tell me about the gun?" "Well, it's a full-weight 4. Back-action underlever hammer gun, dual triggers, of course. 24 pounds empty with 24-inch barrels. Bores are mint, extractor gun, no ejectors, of course. Outside of the barrels, there's a few pits, but the gun's 90+% original finish. Action's tight. You can't pull the barrels off the face. Splinter forend, but on a 4, it's a pretty big splinter. The man said with a laugh. Dark wood, nice straight grain, no figure to speak of. Got a small repair in the grip just back of the tang. But you have to look real close. It was done right, and looks as if it's been that way for a long while. Cheek piece for a right-handed shooter, pad's been replaced, but I don't know how long ago. Case is original, and has a bunch of real old steamship stickers on it, so the gun's been used in either Africa or India, or both. Leather straps are missing, got one lathe-turned brass case, some fiber wads, and a bullet mold somebody made up for it a few years ago. Big 2,000 grain conical job. What's the length of pull? I'd have to measure, and it's down in the safe, but the stock hasn't been shortened or lengthened or anything, if that's what you mean. Have you shot it? Henry asked. Not with full loads, the man admitted. I fired a few rounds with 100 grains of double F. Didn't kick as bad as I thought. No shit, Henry said to himself. The correct load's between 380 and 440 grains of powder, depending on what the gun was regulated for. He took a breath and asked the question. What's the price? She's the best gun I've ever owned, the man on the other end of the line said with a sigh. It was a comment that sellers used as a matter of course, but in this case, Henry knew the man was speaking the truth. Henry Bowman felt that the only finer weapon in existence would have to be another 4-bore. I want 8,500 for it, the seller continued. This one fellow made me a firm offer of 8,000, and I'm giving him until noon on Friday to get me the money. If he doesn't, and you want it for 8, it's yours. Henry swallowed. Okay, he said, after just a moment's hesitation. But I have to have a 1-day inspection. I don't doubt your description, it sounds as if you're very thorough. But I intend to shoot this gun, and if the stock doesn't fit me, I can't take it. I'll call you within an hour after I get the gun to tell you if I'm keeping it, and I'll pay shipping both ways if I send it back. Sounds fair to me. 3-day inspection's normal. Oh, I won't need that long. What's your full name and mailing address? And are there any other phone numbers I should have to reach you at noon on Friday? The man on the other end of the line gave him the information. I'll call you at exactly noon, Henry promised, and hung up. Now I've got to wait until Friday, he thought. New chapter here. Beginning at the start of page 316 of the ebook edition, corresponding to page 367 of the hardcover edition, we have Chapter 103, Domestic Abuse and Acquiring a 4-bore, dated December 20th, 1974. December 20th, 1974. Bureau of Standards. How may we help you? Yes, sir. I know you're not the bank, but I've got to set a clock to the exact time within a second or two is good enough, and I can't get your radio signal here, Henry said into the phone. Can you help me out? What time zone? Central. It's 17 minutes after 10, and about 40 seconds. Hang with me and I'll give you when it hits 18 after. Thanks, I'll wait. Henry had stopped his watch with the second hand on the 12 before he made the call. Now he adjusted the minute hand to show 18 after 10 and prepared to push in the stem to restart the timepiece. Right now. Got it. Thanks a lot. Henry broke the connection. Elsewhere. Shut that fucking kid up, Boone Caswell commanded. He liked to stay in bed on Sundays after a night of heavy drinking. Boone looked at the clock beside the bed. 6:30, Christ! It's too goddamn early in the morning for this shit. He turned over in the bed, but it was no use. The crying bored into his brain, making his hangover even worse. Myra, can you shut her up? Caswell climbed out of the bed naked and marched into the living room. His 4-year-old daughter Cindy sat on the couch, trembling as she cried. She wanted to tell her parents that she'd just had a terrible nightmare. When she saw she had succeeded in summoning her father, she increased the volume. To Boone Caswell, it seemed as if a hot steel needle was being thrust into his brain. "Shut the fuck up!" he bellowed, and delivered a vicious slap across Cindy's face. The blow knocked her sideways on the couch. It was the first time Boone Caswell had ever struck his daughter, and his action had the opposite of the intended result. Cindy screamed even more loudly. Nonetheless, Boone Caswell was smiling when he returned to his bedroom. Elsewhere, at 5 seconds past 11 local time, Henry Bowman made the call. "Hello? Oh, good afternoon. Henry Bowman in St. Louis calling again about the Rhoda. Please tell me it hasn't been sold." "Yeah, hey, I got your cashier's check this morning. Didn't know you were going to overnight it to me. Nice of you to put in an extra $40 for shipping, too. Lots of folks always want the seller to pay for it." "Did the other guy come through?" Henry asked quickly. "Haven't heard from him." There was a pause. "Yeah, my clock says it's a couple minutes after noon." "So it's mine?" "Lest you change your mind when you see it. Yeah, she's yours." "I mean, if this other guy shows up as soon as we hang up, and he's got $8,000 in $100 bills in his hand, it's still my gun, right?" Henry repeated. The man on the other end laughed. "Well, that's how I do business. I gave him till noon. It's past that time. His money isn't here, and yours is. You bought yourself a 4-bore double rifle, mister. Been looking for one, I take it?" "Yeah, for 15 years, Henry said with feeling. As it turned out, Henry Bowman had not needed to call Fort Collins to get the exact time. The other man who had wanted the gun did not contact the owner of the big rifle to tell him he'd rounded up the money until almost 12:30 p.m. And when he did, it was over the phone and not in person. He was very upset to learn that the gun had been sold, but as a serious buyer, he played by the rules and knew that the roles could have been reversed. The seller called Henry and suggested waiting until after Christmas before dropping the package off at the UPS office. Henry Bowman reluctantly agreed to this sensible recommendation. New chapter here. Chapter 104. A Thing of Beauty. This chapter begins at the start of page 318 of the ebook edition and corresponds to page 369 of the hardcover edition and is dated December 30th, 1974. Beginning now. December 30th, 1974. "Oh my God," Henry thought when he lifted the lid of the 90-year-old fitted oak and leather trunk case and pushed aside the newspaper that had been used to cushion the contents. The rifle which lay inside had seen substantial use, but it had been well cared for considering it had been built for hard service. The quality of the workmanship was superb, and the size! Henry marveled. It was just as he remembered in the photo Al Goodman had shown him all those years ago. The overall length of the Rhoda was no greater than his .577 Rigby, but it was much more massive. Henry Bowman lifted the barrels out of their felt-lined compartment, swung the fore-end lever to the side, and removed the fore-end. He examined the bores. They were mint, as promised, and huge. He stuck his thumb in the muzzle of the bore for the right barrel. It didn't even touch both sides. Fuck, they're so big, I could almost... Well, not quite, Henry thought. Oh. Oh, Henry. Oh, Henry. No, don't go fucking your rifle. Jesus Christ. They were mint as promised, and huge. He stuck his thumb in the muzzle of the right barrel. It didn't even touch both sides. They're so big, I could almost... well, not quite, Henry thought. He hung the barrels from a piece of string and wrapped them with a wooden ruler. They rang like a big gong. He laid the barrels on the carpet, lifted the stock receiver out of the case, and swung the big underlever to the side. He picked up the barrels, fitted them to the breech, and swung them shut while returning the underlever to its original position. Then he fitted the fore-end iron to the barrels and locked it in place with the fore-end lever. He cocked the hammers and stuffed a sock in between their noses and the firing pins, then tested both triggers. They broke cleanly with no trace of creep, Henry was pleased to note, albeit with a rather heavy pull. Henry stood up, closed his eyes, and threw the 24-pound rifle to his shoulder with one fluid motion. When he opened his eyes, the front sight bead was resting in the V-notch of the 50-yard rear leaf. The stock would not have fit Henry any better if he had been the original owner for whom the gun was built. He was grinning like an idiot as he carried the big rifle over to the end of the couch and picked up the telephone. Also, before I continue on to the next chapter, just a quick tangent. I've seen videos of 4-bore rifles for sale. Like, I think Forgotten Weapons did a video of one in partnership with, I don't know if it was like Rock Island Auction or some other auction house. But there's actually at least one video floating around showing a listing for a 4-bore rifle that is confirmed to have had, at one time, belonged to John Ross, that I think he auctioned off, or his estate auctioned off after he died. I'm not too sure. But there is his rifle somewhere floating around in public circulation. And I mean, if somebody really, really was a fan of this book, they could probably hunt it down, pay a pretty penny, and buy it. That would be obscenely cool, I've got to admit. But c'est la vie. There's also a video, too, of John Ross actually shooting a 4-bore floating around. I've seen on YouTube, too. So this is cool stuff. This is very cool niche stuff that's kind of like gun nerd-esque, and I just love the fact that he included all of this in the book. I mean, plot-wise, it's not super relevant, aside from just, hey, his character, Henry Bowman, loves big 4-bore guns and other big guns. And it's just like, world's best gun nut, and that's awesome. But all the gun nerd stuff in this book, if this thing ever got converted into like a TV series or a movie, I have a strong suspicion like 90% of the preamble parts, like 1, 2, 3, 4, would probably be significantly condensed and cut, and this is probably one of those things that probably wouldn't make it in, but it's still cool, and if they could include it, that would be epic. Seriously, I don't know who owns the movie rights or TV rights or whatever to this, but aside from the fact that whoever would adapt it might butcher the hell out of it, they need to make a movie of this, or a TV series, honestly, like, would be better, probably. Like, I don't know, something for maybe Netflix or Amazon Prime or whatever the hell. It's just something long form enough to actually flesh out the story properly. Because this shit's cool. All right, I'm going to continue with the book here. Enough with my rambling and so forth. All right, we're at 11:05 a.m. on January 31st, 2025 here. Thank God it's a Friday. All right, let's continue with our recording, shall we? New chapter here. Here we have chapter 105, Handloads, dated January 25th, 1975. This chapter begins on page 319 of the ebook edition, corresponding to page 370 of the hardcover edition. Beginning now. January 25th, 1975. I don't think you really need 25, but I got them all done, Kurt Benke said as he let Henry Bowman in the back door of his basement workshop. I know you're chomping at the bit to go fire that monster. Matter of fact, I'd like to watch. Henry followed the gunsmith over to his cluttered workbench. Benke reached into a box and pulled out a polished brass cartridge case, 4 inches long and about 1.25 inches in diameter, which he handed to Henry. Only a handful of makers in England had ever made 4-bore rifles, and each firm's guns used ammunition that was specific to that manufacturer. Henry had never intended to even look for the correct original ammunition for his gun. Even if it could be located, 100-year-old ammo loaded with black powder would not likely still deliver original ballistics. If it did, it would still be too valuable to collectors to justify shooting it up. Henry had obtained a 10-foot length of 1 3/8 inch round brass bar stock, and cut it in half so he could get it in Kurt Behnke's basement. Behnke had used his power hacksaw and lathe to make 25 cases that exactly fit Henry's gun. Cut the primer pocket for 50 cal machine gun primers, like you wanted, but I think a shotgun primer would have been plenty, Behnke opined as he went to his safe and retrieved the barrels to Henry's Rhoda. 400 grains of FG Black is a lot to light off, Henry replied as he dropped the oiled case into the right chamber. It fit perfectly. He extracted it and tried it on the left one with the same results. Near as I could tell with my inside mics, the chambers are within a couple tenths of each other, the gunsmith said. When did you say that gun was made? 1880, Henry answered. Little more precision work involved than on an 1873 leather-action 4440, huh? He said with an upraised eyebrow. Behnke nodded in agreement, then moved over to his lathe. Here's the shell holder I made for it. And here's your neck-sizing die, your seating punch, and your crimp die, all threaded 1.5" 12 for the Hollywood press of yours. You sure it's good enough leverage? It sizes my 20mm cannon brass okay, Henry pointed out. Oh. Right. Henry Behnke periodically seemed to forget about some of the larger guns that Henry Bowman owned and used. He himself did not own a rifle larger than .30 caliber, although that would change after his 70th birthday when continued exposure to Henry Bowman's enthusiasm for elephant guns would prompt Behnke to build one for himself. Henry inspected the handmade loading tools. They were flawlessly machined. How much do I owe you? He asked. Behnke looked pained. I've got over 40 hours in all this stuff. I've got to have 300. He did not let on, but he still thought of Henry Bowman as the 10-year-old who had first come into the basement workshop with his father in 1963. You take cash on Saturdays? Henry asked as he reached into his pocket. It was an old joke. If that's all you got, the older man replied, deadpan. You busy tomorrow, Kurt? Or would you like to watch me break my collarbone? I'm going out to the range to see how it shoots, Henry said as he handed over the bills. I'll be there by 8:30. Behnke grinned. New chapter here. But before I get to that, one other thing I wanted to add, just as a aside. There aren't really that many modern cartridges for big elephant gun type stuff. I mean, yeah, there's the Holland and Holland stuff. There's probably a couple of other modern ones, but you can get still, how cool would it be if you had like some newer weird Wildcat cartridge that could actually be made with reasonably accessible brass? I mean, I've always had the idea in the back of my head, like, if you took a 50 cal case and, like, if you can fit a 50 cal case inside of a 12 gauge shotgun, and if you fire it, the pressure doesn't go very high because like, again, it's not tightly fitted, so the 50's just kind of flying around and pinwheeling through the air or whatever. And then you have like a blown out brass case that's shaped to a 12 gauge bore. How freaking cool would it be if you were able to take like either a cut down 50 cal brass case or like a blown out 50 case like that, and then you had a really heavy duty stiff action, and you were able to pack like a 12 gauge slug into the front of this, and like, obviously it wouldn't be safe to run in an actual shotgun. The thing would blow up in an instant, no question. But if you were to build like a custom full-size gun that would actually fit that, I mean, that would just be fucking cool as hell. And I mean, I don't think we have ready access, at least in Canada and probably even in the US, to like larger size of brass that's factory made that you could potentially hand load. But again, if there was something, like, we need to bring back big bore guns just because they're just cool. I mean, they're not really practical for anything aside from maybe hunting in certain jurisdictions at certain times of the year, or just shooting for the hell of it because they're cool. But oh my god, like, that would just be freaking amazing. Like, thing would kick like a damn mule. But oh my god. All right, I'll stop nerding out for 5 seconds. Excusez-moi. Alright. Time is 11:13 a.m., January 31st, 2025, on a Friday. Friday, January 31st, 2025, at 11:14 a.m. Next chapter here. Here on page 320 of the ebook edition, corresponding to page 371 of the hardcover edition, we have chapter 106, Load Testing, dated January 26th, 1975. Chapter 106, Load Testing, January 26th, 1975. Well, here goes nothing, Henry Bowman said as he pulled the butt into his shoulder, tightened his grip on the fore end, leaned forward, and squeezed the front trigger with his right index finger. He had placed a large, heavy wooden crate on top of the concrete shooting bench and a cheap, loosely rolled sleeping bag on top of the crate. The sleeping bag was in such a position that Henry could rest his left forearm on it while holding the rifle and standing straight up. It was how he shot double rifles for accuracy, for it allowed support while permitting the gun to recoil in the same way that it would when fired offhand. This was important for double rifles, for unlike single-barrel rifles, the axis of each bore on a double was to the side of the axis of recoil, not in line with it. If a double barrel were shot off sandbags, it would shoot to a different point of impact than when it was fired offhand. The trigger broke at 16 pounds, and the huge rifle rocked Henry's body backward about 10 degrees as a deep whoom rattled the galvanized roof over the firing line. The large cloud of white smoke which had belched out of the gun's muzzle began to drift away in the wind. Henry lowered the rifle and looked at Kurt Benke. Not bad at all. I could shoot that load all day. Of course, it wasn't a full charge. Both men stared downrange at the 50-yard target butt. No problem spotting your shots with that gun, Benke said immediately as he hopped from one foot to the other in the cold weather. The 1-inch bullet hole was very easy to see with the naked eye at the 50-yard distance. Henry had used black spray paint, butcher's paper, and a paper plate to stencil a black ring for a target. His shot was 2 inches outside the black at 2 o'clock, which put it about 8 inches right of center and 3 inches high. He cocked the left hammer and took aim again, this time squeezing the rear trigger. The big gun boomed again, and this shot was a mirror image of the first shot, on the left side of the target. The 2 holes were at the same height, spaced about 15 inches apart. Ha! Henry yelled with pleasure when he saw where his second shot had gone. That's good? The bench-rest gunsmith and record holder asked dubiously. 15 inches apart for 2 shots at 50 yards was good for a bow and arrow, maybe, but not any rifle Benke would want to own. Elevation's identical, and the barrels are shooting apart and high with a load that's too light. That's a real good sign. The gun starts recoiling as soon as the primer goes off. With a light powder charge, there's more time between when the primer ignites and when the bullet leaves the muzzle. That means the right barrel should shoot right and high, and the left barrel should shoot left and high. That's the theory, at least. Remember the engineer's creed. When the results don't agree with the theory, believe the results and come up with a new theory, the gunsmith answered. Right. Let's see what results we get when we up the powder charge 50 grains. Kurt Benke winced. Bench rest shooters fired cartridges which held around 25 grains total. A .300 Magnum case held 3 times that. A cartridge where the shooter might elect to increase his powder charge by 50 grains was an assault on Benke's sensibilities. What load were you shooting? He managed to ask. 300 grains of single FG. Because this gun weighs a full 24 pounds, I suspect it was regulated for the full 16 dram charge. That's 1 ounce or 438 grains. The next pair I'll shoot is a 350 grain charge, same bullet. What's your bullet weight? The slugs I'm shooting weigh 2,140 grains out of the linotype metal. Some of these old guns were regulated for a round ball cast out of pure lead, which would weigh 1,750 grains. Most of them were set up for conical bullets, though, as near as I can determine. If it still shoots apart with the 440 grain charge, I'll have to shoot lighter bullets. Kurt Behnke watched as Henry extracted the fired cases and replaced them with another pair. He did not ask Henry if he had brought ammunition loaded with the 440 grain charge he had mentioned. He believed he already knew the answer. The report of the next two shots was noticeably different. It was both louder and sharper, and the older man could see that the gun recoiled with more vigor. On the second shot, he watched the target instead of the shooter, and was startled to see a large quantity of dirt and ice from the backstop thrown 20 feet in the air behind the target frame. The holes in the paper were 8 inches apart, spaced equally on either side of center, and an inch high. Looks like your theory's holding up. Nice not to need a spotting scope, don't you think? Recoil still okay? It's definitely getting heavier. Notice the difference in the sound? Those two were supersonic. 1,100 feet per second? Behnke said immediately. For some reason, it had not occurred to him that the huge bullets could be driven that fast out of a gun which could still be fired from the shoulder. Oh, well, we're not done yet. Here comes 400 grains. Henry pushed his earplugs in a little deeper, reloaded the Rhoda, and rested his arm against the rolled sleeping bag. He made a conscious effort to grip the gun as tightly as possible. The recoil, while still manageable, was unlike that of any other weapon he had ever used, and he didn't want to drop the gun. This time, the report sounded to Henry like standing next to a tree as it was struck by lightning. A 1-inch hole appeared in the paper less than 2 inches right of center and dead on for elevation. Henry cocked the left hammer and took aim again. His second shot was a little higher than his first and a little over 3 inches left of it. "How high you gonna go?" the older man asked. "I loaded some at 440, Henry replied. "I'll clean the gunk out of the barrels and give 'em a go." He swung the underlever to the side, broke the gun open, emptied it, and laid it on a blanket on the next shooting bench. Henry Bowman picked up an aluminum shotgun cleaning rod with a 12-gauge brush screwed in the end, and wrapped a large piece of rag around the bristles. He sprayed the cloth liberally with WD-40, sprayed more into the breech of the right barrel, and shoved the rod down the bore from the breech. When the wrapped brush emerged from the muzzle, it was thoroughly caked with shiny black carbon residue. Henry inspected the bore, then used a new piece of rag to repeat the process with the other barrel. There's a lot of it, but it seems to come right out. "I think the aloe and beeswax bullet lube I'm using may be an improvement over what the Brits had 100 years ago," Henry said. "Although it wouldn't surprise me if they had something just as good or better, too," he amended after a moment's reflection. "Fresh target this time," Henry said as he removed 2 big cartridges from the bag he had labeled 440 and loaded the gun. He wiped the fog from his shooting glasses and assumed the position at the standing rest. This time he made an effort to put his feet a little further back so that he would be leaning into the gun a little more. The blast was tremendous, and recoil rocked Henry back until the muzzles of his rifle were pointing up at about a 45-degree angle. Henry brought the gun down out of recoil and cocked the left hammer. He settled back into the bag and locked into position again as he switched his index finger to the rear trigger. "It looks like you're..." The sound of the second shot cut off Kurt Behnke's comment about where Henry's first shot had gone. Henry laid the gun down on the blanket, and both men squinted off into the distance. "Almost touching," the older man said with admiration in his voice. "Let me put 2 more of the same load in there, see if they fall in the same group." Henry had loaded 4 rounds each with 400 and 440 grain charges and 8 rounds of 300 and 350 grain loadings. He replaced the fired cases with his 2 remaining rounds that carried the heaviest charge. Kurt Behnke stepped several paces to the side and held a camera trained on his friend. Behnke was braced against one of the roof supports, for he knew the blast would jar a freehand hold. At the shot, the gunsmith tripped the shutter, catching Henry in full recoil. Henry Bowman recovered, cocked the left hammer, and let drive with the second barrel. He looked over at his 59-year-old companion. "Doesn't look too bad," he opined. The target showed 2 pairs of overlapping holes, with about an inch of space between them. Elevation was perfect. Benkei stared at the target butt. "You gonna raise the charge again?" he asked uncertainly. The barrels were obviously very close to regulating perfectly. "I think I'll lower the bullet weight instead. Could you take 1/8 of an inch off the base in the lathe without too much trouble?" Yeah, sure. Put 'em in the collet chuck. I could give you a half dozen each of several different weights. You don't need 1,000 or anything like that, do you?" Both men broke into laughter at that idea. Henry wiped down the Rhoda and laid it on the blanket. "I think I'll give my central nervous system a rest for a while. Shall we shoot some varmint rifles? 300 yards, 5 groups averaged for record, loser buys lunch." "What kind of a handicap do I have to give you?" Benkei asked cautiously. "None. I'm in too good a mood about my 4-bore. Kurt Benkei just smiled. When they were finishing shooting, Kurt Benkei had an average group size of 1.42 inches. All his groups were nearly round. Henry's groups had a little over an inch of vertical dispersion, but on that gusty January day, the horizontal spread averaged almost 4 inches. His targets were what Kurt Benkei liked to refer to as weather reports. Henry Bowman was still grinning when he picked up the check for a late lunch. New chapter here. All right, good afternoon, everyone. The time is currently 4:28 p.m., or 16:28 hours, on Tuesday, February 4th, 2025. Today we are going to continue with our recording segment for Unintended Consequences by John Ross, Part 2M, Growth Continued. Our previous recording session, prior to editing, has about an hour, 14 minutes, and 7 seconds of audio, just the raw audio. So after editing, I suspect it's going to be a fair bit shorter. Therefore, we're probably going to tie all of these together and just keep it as part of Part 2M. In any case, our next chapter here is going to be Chapter 107, A New Congressman, dated February 22nd, 1977. This section starts at the top of page 323 of the ebook edition, and... Un momente, señor and señorita. Here we are. Our next chapter here is Chapter 107, A New Congressman, dated February 22nd, 1977. This section begins at the top of page 323 of the ebook edition and page 374 of the hardcover print edition. Beginning now. This is Unintended Consequences, a novel by John Ross. Chapter 107, A New Congressman, February 22nd, 1977. "Hey!" the man yelled out across the office, his hand covering the mouthpiece of the telephone he held. "Sloan just had a massive cerebral hemorrhage. Dead as a hammer in Washington." His friend sat bolt upright. His mind was racing, and he was already thinking several steps ahead to the special election that would have to be held to replace the dead congressman. "Carter's only been in office a month. Maybe we can make some hay on this one." "Some other well-intentioned guy out of left field, you mean?" He began to smile. The idea was definitely appealing. Somebody we can control? His smile grew broader. Then his brows furrowed. "Gotta be someone white, though. Might backfire if we try to sneak in another Clay," he warned. The second man nodded at this assessment. There were limits, after all. The goal was to always expand them. "Yeah," he said, nodding his head. "What we need is somebody who can tell people what they want to hear and doesn't have some stupid agenda that can get us in trouble." "Shit, that doesn't narrow the field much." "Yeah, but somebody young and good-looking, and who can smile without looking like Eleanor Roosevelt, so the voters will want to pay more taxes." "Makes it harder. Suddenly the two men's heads snapped towards each other. "Dick Gaines!" they said in unison. Missouri's next United States congressman for the 3rd District had just been chosen. New chapter here. Unintended Consequences by John Ross. Chapter 108. Death, Taxes, and Fabian Conspiracy. Dated April 9th, 1978. This chapter begins at the top of page 324 of the ebook edition and page 375 of the hardcover print edition. Beginning now. April 9th, 1978. I won't ask what's going through your mind when you signed this, the senior accountant from Ernst & Whinney said, with a smile as he took the check and placed it with the other documents for delivery to the IRS. Please don't. Henry Bowman's face was utterly without expression, and his tone of voice told the accountant he wanted no further discussion. You need me for anything else? No, I think we're all set. Then I'll be going. Henry turned on his heel and left the office. The entire way home, Henry Bowman thought about just how much he had come to despise both the socialist policies his country's government had adopted and the people who had forced those policies on the public. Isn't that why this nation was formed? To get us away from this very thing? He asked himself over and over. As Henry walked into the kitchen, he hung his jacket over the back of a chair. The house still didn't feel right to him, with his mother gone. Every time he walked through a doorway, he half expected to see her, especially after being away on a job for several days. Catherine Bowman had died very suddenly of a heart attack almost a year before, while carrying a box of plants from her station wagon to the pantry off the kitchen. She was 61 years old. Henry had moved out of his apartment and back into the house he had grown up in, to undertake the arduous task of settling his mother's estate. The 55% haircut appalled him. Henry Bowman had known that taxes would be bad, but losing over half of everything his parents owned was a shock. Estates of less than $175,000 were not taxed. Above that figure, taxes quickly rose to a staggering 77% on estates of over $10 million. A figure that, while terrible at that time, would have been worse given inflation in the years to come. The law allowed 9 months to come up with the money, which meant selling a lot of things. Henry had reluctantly come to the conclusion that keeping the family summer property would mean selling all the stocks and bonds, and the country place was maintenance intensive. Without income from savings to maintain it, Henry had seen that its upkeep would bankrupt him. It was now being subdivided for development, and the entire proceeds from the sale, along with his mother's entire bond portfolio and much of the stocks, had just gone to the IRS. And the estate tax program doesn't even break even, Henry thought with disgust. He had scarcely believed it when the accountant told him, but it made sense. Very few people saved $175,000 in property and other assets. Taxes on the estates of those few people who conserved and invested their assets successfully enough to rise above this level generated less taxes than the costs of administration. The estate tax wasn't there to help pay for things the country needed. It was there to prevent Americans from passing their property and their savings on to their descendants. Shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. That's what Andrew Carnegie said. Henry closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He did not like feeling angry like this. He opened the door to the basement stairs, flicked on the light switch, and descended the steps to the woodworking shop that Walter Bowman had built, and that had been Henry's for the last decade. The smell relaxed him immediately. Henry went to the partially finished gun stock that was clamped in the padded jaws of the bench vise. He ran his hands over the Bastogne walnut, taking in the wonderful scent of his favorite wood. The Enfield Action, barreled in 500 Buchmiller, lay on the bench behind the stock. This one's going to be pure poison when I get too tired to carry my Rada, Henry thought. Design weight for the 5-shot magazine rifle was 10.5 pounds. It would fire a 600-grain .510-inch bullet at 2,400 feet per second, as opposed to the .458, which threw a smaller 500-grain slug at 2,250 feet per second using strong hand loads. Factory .458 offerings sent the same bullet out at less than 2,000 feet per second. The unfinished rifle made Henry think about his impending safari to Rhodesia, and his spirits lifted considerably. Gotta get this stock finished if I want to practice any before I go. His Rhodesian safari was scheduled for the entire month of September. Henry Bowman lifted an artist's paintbrush out of a small pot of oil in lampblack, and gave the underside of the barreled receiver a thin coat of the wet mix. Then he lowered the metalwork into the stock, and pressed it firmly, and lifted it out again. Henry inspected the wood closely, looking at every place that was blackened where the metal had touched it. About 75% contact. He shook his head. Abe and Van Horn wouldn't settle for 75%, Henry said to himself, referring to the stockmakers whose work he most admired. He chose a round-end scraper from several dozen that were in a rack on his bench and went to work. Elsewhere, "Have the people in this country lost their minds?" Congressman Gaines demanded. His aide knew better than to answer questions such as that, and remained silent. "Listen to this. Quote, all across the country, a disturbing trend is taking shape. Americans are stockpiling food and rediscovering home canning in preparation for what they see as the inevitable result of runaway inflation, unchecked government spending, and the abdication of the United States of America's strength and respect abroad. The debate about the Panama Canal is but one of many examples of what these citizens view as a drastically weakened foreign policy, with ultimate consequences much more serious and far-reaching than mere loss of pride. These people call themselves survivalists, and they are not wringing their hands. They are taking action. Survivalists are learning mechanical skills. They are storing massive amounts of consumables, not only food, but diesel fuel, gasoline, and goods for barter. They are planting large vegetable gardens and digging wells on their own private property. Any money they have left after these large purchases of basic necessities is used to buy gold. These measures are the only protection survivalists feel they can give their families in the event that economic disaster does come to pass." End quote. He put down the magazine and stared across the lunch table at his subordinate. "What kind of crap is this?" he asked rhetorically. Congressman Richard Gaines had been reading a national news magazine, quoting from one of the many current articles describing a phenomenon which was occurring all across the country. Suddenly he thought of something. "I thought it was illegal to buy gold." Gerald Ford changed that when he was in office, Congressman." "That fool," Gaines sneered. The aide did not point out to the young congressman that gold had been the underlying asset for the world's major monetary systems for thousands of years, and it was Franklin Roosevelt, with a huge majority in both Congress and the Senate, who had unhitched the currency from its anchor and made it a federal crime for United States citizens to own this basic store of value. That happened in 1934, a year that saw other federal proposals with far-reaching implications for the American public become law. "So, what can we do about this?" Gaines demanded. His aide opened his mouth to speak, but realized he hadn't the vaguest idea what the congressman was after. Strengthen foreign policy? Not much the young congressman could do there. Pledge to introduce no legislation unless it repealed spending programs? It would be interesting to see how his constituents reacted to that. The aide shrugged in reply. Richard Gaines was obviously pondering his own question. I could introduce a bill prohibiting ownership of more than, say, a month's worth of basic necessities. Exemption for bona fide producers, of course. Farmers and all that. Go through the records of all the bulk sellers, look for individual purchasers. Any excess food they've got over the 1-month limit, take it and put it into a government-administered fund to be sold at below-market rates to the people who are below the poverty line. That'd look real good to the public. Make these crazy end-of-the-world types give their food to the people who really needed it. He chewed his lip, thinking. Couldn't do the same thing very easily with gas or diesel, so we'd have a line in there prohibiting home storage. Make it a crime to have more than 10 gallons aside from what was in your car and lawnmower. Underground tanks would have to be filled in. Richard Gaines was pondering other elements of his bill when a large, weathered hand was laid on his shoulder. Son, I just finished eating dinner at the next table over yonder, and I couldn't help but hear you telling your friend about this idea of yours for a bill. The speaker was a large man with white hair, in his 70s or early 80s. Before you get your secretary to type it up for you, I think you might want to reread the Constitution, because right now you've got several problems that are gonna come up and bite you. Like that plan you got to take what people been hoarding, put it in a government fund. Gonna run smack into the Fifth Amendment, I'm afraid, taking property like that without compensation. Now, finding out who to take it from, that's gonna butt heads with the Fourth Amendment. That's the one about unreasonable search and seizure, case you forgot. Might even get some squawk on the 10th Amendment, though that one's a little shaky. Anyway, thought you might want to think about those things a bit before you start figuring that since Constitution was written a couple 100 years ago by some fellows who dressed and talked kind of funny, it's not much interest except to college professors writing about ancient history. He chuckled as he thought of something. Last fellow in this town who felt that way got in a whole mess of trouble, you may recall. The man lifted his hand from Gaines's shoulder, nodded once, and walked towards the exit. Just who the hell was that old goat? Gaines asked his aide when the old man had left the restaurant. The stranger had been exactly right in his assumption about the young congressman's view of the Constitution, and it irritated Gaines to be talked to like someone in grade school. Oh, him? Senator Sam Ervin. He eats in here sometimes. Retired 4 years ago after he finished up his job as chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Presidential Campaign Activities. The aide saw Gaines's blank look and continued. You know, the Watergate hearings? Ended up with Nixon resigning? Oh, yeah. I thought I'd seen him somewhere before, Gaines said. Look, the aide said to his boss, wanting to get him back in good humor and recognizing how to do it. What he said about the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, that's true as far as it goes, but that's only a problem when you try to do what you want head on. What do you mean? Well, the aide said as he chewed a bit of steak and gestured with his fork, when you try to pass progressive laws and do what's best for the country, a lot of times the people will resist. At least when you try to do too much too fast. You know about the Fabian Society in England? Gaines shook his head. The aide smiled and took a deep breath. He loved political history, and didn't get to talk about it often enough. Here was a chance to look good for the boss. Fabian Society was a political organization founded in the 1880s in Great Britain. Their ultimate goal was to establish a socialist government in England. They knew if they came out and said that, though, their ideas would be rejected immediately by the majority of people. So they began to gradually educate the public by publishing essays that explained the benefits of socialist ideas. And they framed their ideas in terms that would appeal to the influential upper class, because those are usually the people that can get things done. Anyway, because of that strategy, they were very successful. They were the major force behind the Labor Representation Committee that was founded at the turn of the century. He saw Gaines's blank look and added, The LRC was what became England's Labour Party. So? Gaines asked. He didn't see where this was going, and he was getting bored with talk about England. So, they got what the Fabians had always wanted, the aide said hurriedly. At least, a lot of it. The Labour Party won by a landslide in 1945, and Prime Minister Attlee was able to finally create a welfare state in England, which was a real coup. Within 2 years of that, they had free medical care for everyone, the government owned the Bank of England, and they'd let India, Pakistan, Ceylon, and Burma go. Within 5 or 6 years, they had nationalized a quarter of the country's industry. The aide did not mention that these policies resulted in a massive trade deficit, subsequent food rationing, and drastic devaluation of the pound sterling currency. It went without saying that in all socialist endeavors, certain inconveniences had to be tolerated by individuals for the greater good of the public as a whole. The aide's eyes were bright as he stared at the congressman. It never could have happened all at once, and that's what I think we need to keep in mind. So, 50 years. Is that what you're telling me? Gaines asked with irritation. Oh, no, not at all, sir, the aide said quickly, shaking his head vigorously. We got our welfare state over 40 years ago. And what you were just talking about, wanting to ban hoarding and distribute the survivalists' food to the poor? You don't have to listen to that old asshole preach about how your law would violate the Constitution. You don't even need to pass a new law at all, really. We've already got the power. What do you mean? Gaines asked. The Emergency Powers Act gives the president the authority to do whatever he wants in a time of national emergency. It was meant to be invoked in the event of a nuclear war, but there's nothing in it that specifies that particular circumstance. If the president wants to, he can use it. Order the army to seize all the people's stockpiles of food, diesel fuel, gold, guns, whatever. Nationwide curfew, censor the press, you name it. He can do it under the Emergency Powers Act. Money, too. If the president says no taking money out of the country, even a few $100s, boom, it's a crime. Freeze bank accounts, seize assets, anything he wants, really. So we've got the authority already, but it takes special circumstances, eh? I guess the next step is to make the circumstances less unusual then, right? Gaines said. That's it. His aide replied with a grin. The people won't give up the things they think they are entitled to if you try to take them all at once. You need to start with something that sounds so innocuous that you can ridicule anyone that opposes you. Then expand it. Do what the Fabian Society did. Treat it just as you would a salami, a slice at a time. The congressional aide was well versed in his political history, but he was ignorant of the National Firearms Act of 1934. If he had been familiar with this particular piece of legislation, however, he would have used it as a textbook example of the strategy he was advocating. Departing briefly from the text, that reference there to seizing bank accounts and that sort of thing actually happened here in Canada in real life. A number of years ago now, there was a protest in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic measures, and a lot of truckers were protesting on the grounds of, some people don't want to get vaccinated or whatever, and other ones even that do have concerns about all these lockdown measures. It's hindering our income because, cross-border shipping and stuff, if that's their primary business. They were basically being forced to quarantine, I think, for 2 weeks on either side of the border, and it was negatively impacting their incomes. So they went to go protest in Ottawa, the capital of Canada, and they also blocked several border crossings in protest. And the Canadian government's response was to institute the Emergency Powers Act version in Canada, which used to be called the War Measures Act and hadn't been enacted since Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau, instituted it during the FLQ crisis with a bunch of terrorists basically kidnapping and shooting at politicians and whatnot years and years ago in Quebec, fighting for independence for that province. But he seized the bank accounts of people who were protesting against him, threw people in jail, declared them terrorists and enemies of the state. It was kind of insane. And yeah, these things aren't just applicable to the United States. They happen in Canada too. Anyway, continuing now with the book. Good evening, everyone. It is presently 18:28 hours, or 6:28 p.m., on Monday, February 10th, 2025. Tonight we are going to continue with our previous recording session under the heading of Part 2M for Unintended Consequences. I could continue this as a new section, but I honestly think it's probably too short, the previous one. So hopefully we're going to try and carry this forward until we can get to about 2 hours of finished length for this coming section. Anyway, tonight we are going to pick up on the top of page 341 of the ebook edition, marked here February 17th, 1982. The date tonight is presently Monday, February 10th, 2025 at 6:30 p.m. Tonight we are going to pick up at the start of page 328 of the ebook edition, corresponding to page 380 of the hardcover text. This section is entitled Chapter 109, Rhodesian Safari, and dated September 3rd, 1978. Beginning now. This is Unintended Consequences by John Ross, Chapter 109, Rhodesian Safari, dated September 3rd, 1978. This chapter begins on page 328 of the ebook edition and page 380 of the hardcover text. Beginning now. September 3rd, 1978. Do all the outfitters in Africa do this for every client that comes hunting? Henry wondered in disbelief as he stared at the preparations that had been made for his arrival. He had expected a camp similar to the ones he and Alan Kane made for themselves when they went to Idaho. What he got was something altogether different. A 10-foot by 10-foot concrete slab had been poured, and a tent erected over it. It housed a metal-framed bed and a nightstand made of sticks lashed together. A fresh vegetable garden had been planted months before so that fresh salads could be served with every meal. The cook tent was well stocked and even included a freezer that ran on propane. A fire near the cook tent was tended 24 hours a day so that hot water for bathing and washing clothes was available at all times. September 3rd, 1978. Do all the outfitters in Africa do this for every client that comes hunting? Henry wondered in disbelief as he stared at the preparations that had been made for his arrival. He had expected a camp similar to the ones he and Alan Kane made for themselves when they went to Idaho. What he got was something altogether different. A 10-foot by 10-foot concrete slab had been poured, and a tent erected over it. For reference on scale here, 1 meter is approximately 3.28 feet. A 10-foot by 10-foot concrete slab had been poured, and a tent erected over it. It housed a metal-framed bed and a nightstand made of sticks lashed together. A fresh vegetable garden had been planted months before, so that fresh salads could be served with every meal. The cook tent was well stocked and even included a freezer that ran on propane. A 10-foot by 10-foot concrete slab had been poured, and a tent erected over it. A 10-foot by 10-foot concrete slab had been poured, and a tent erected over it. It housed a metal-framed bed and a nightstand made of sticks lashed together. A fresh vegetable garden had been planted months before, so that fresh salads could be served with every meal. The cook tent was well stocked, and even included a freezer that ran on propane. A fire near the cook tent was tended 24 hours a day, so that hot water for bathing and washing clothes was available at all times. The water came from a 200-gallon wheeled storage tank that the crew kept filled with regular trips to the river. The water came from a 200-gallon wheeled storage tank that the crew kept filled with regular trips to the river. A 5-gallon can with a screw valve and shower head attached hung suspended from a tree limb near Henry's tent. A 5-gallon can with a screw valve and shower head attached hung suspended from a tree limb near Henry's tent, and was filled with hot water whenever Henry wanted a shower. A 5-gallon drum of water was lashed into the crook of a tree 10 feet above the ground and was piped to a flush toilet at the back of the camp. Ray had asked Henry for his dirty clothes from the trip over, and they were washed immediately. By the end of the month, Henry would realize that he could have gone on the safari without a change of clothes, for the crew washed, dried, ironed, with an iron that was filled with hot coals, and folded his laundry for him every night. The hunting camp that had been built for Henry Bowman was in the Charana Valley, on a million-acre tract of government land south of the Zambezi River. The land was not part of a hunting concession, and Ray Johnson had never been in the area prior to 12 weeks before, although he had been familiar with its reputation. Most modern safaris in Africa were held on hunting concessions similar to the 200,000-acre tract Ray Johnson leased. Most modern safaris in Africa were held on hunting concessions similar to the 200-acre tract Ray Johnson leased, which was 200 miles away from where he and Henry Bowman were now standing. The professional hunter paid the government an annual fee to lease the raw land, and built his own accommodations atop it. The government told him how many animals of which species could be killed in that area each year. The professional hunter then offered hunts to clients and charged them a daily rate for his services, which were all-inclusive except for trophy fees. The client paid the daily rate directly to the professional hunter. He also paid the government a non-refundable trophy fee in advance for each animal he intended to hunt. Trophy fees varied by animal. In 1978, a warthog or baboon in Rhodesia cost $75. A male Cape buffalo cost $500 United States dollars, and a trophy elephant cost $3,000. Ray Johnson's daily rate was $400 United States dollars, typical for a recognized professional hunter in that area. Countries with well-managed game departments, such as Rhodesia, would authorize the killing of only that number of animals which would ensure that the herds continued to thrive. This meant that 1 rhino, 3 or 4 lions, and perhaps 10 elephants could be shot each year on a 200,000-acre concession. Limits for thin-skinned plains game were, of course, much higher. The game department typically erred on the side of caution, and every few years the numbers were temporarily raised on those species which were becoming too numerous. The professional hunter received none of the trophy fee, and had only his daily rate to sustain his business. Because of this, and because the dangerous game was so plentiful that good specimens could be found in 2 or 3 days, professional hunters had minimum safari lengths that they set out for clients wishing to hunt large, dangerous game. A client could go on a 6 or 7 day safari if he would be satisfied with a half-dozen head of thin-skinned plains game such as impala, duiker. A client could go on a 6 or 7 day safari if he would be satisfied with a half-dozen head of thin-skinned plains game such as impala, duiker, oryx, and bushbuck. If he wanted to hunt elephant, buffalo, rhino, lion, or leopard, however, his professional hunter would require at least a 2-week hunt. Customers wanting to hunt several of the Big 5 African game often signed up for safaris of a month or more. The safari Henry Bowman was about to undertake was somewhat different than the norm, however. Each year, the Rhodesian government held auctions which were open to all professional hunters licensed in that country. The authorities would auction off the hunting rights to large tracts of government land that were not being leased out as hunting concessions on a one-season basis. Again, the game department stipulated, in advance of the auction, the number and type of animals that could be killed in that area in the forthcoming season. But the auction price included all trophy fees. The successful bidder could then split up the permitted game and hold several safaris for each at an all-inclusive price. This practice served several functions. First, elephant, buffalo, and rhino... Okay, Commandant, let us begin. This practice served several functions. First, elephant, buffalo, and lion populations were kept at levels which minimized the animals' consumption of the crops and residents in adjacent populated areas. Yes, can't have too many people getting eaten each year. Second, the government received additional revenues which it used for game management and anti-poaching measures, although how these funds were ultimately used was usually startling to the uninitiated. Third, the customers ended up spending a little less money on a hunt, although the accommodations were more Spartan, and the professional hunter made a little extra that season if he scheduled everything intelligently. Third, the customers ended up spending a little less money on a hunt, although the accommodations were more Spartan, and the professional hunter made a little extra money that season if he scheduled everything intelligently. This was the trade-off every professional hunter analyzed when bidding in the annual auction. Scheduling hunts in the new location required setting up a temporary hunting camp with all its attendant support crew of cooks, skinners, and laborers, and took time away from the existing hunting concession where all facilities were already set up. Ray Johnson had made the winning bid for the Charana Valley area on the strength of a 10-minute phone conversation with Max Collins's nephew. Henry had said he was ready to go on a big hunt, and Ray had promised he'd give Henry a hell of a deal provided you're willing to shoot all the game on the ticket, so I don't have to run 4 or 5 safaris with 4 or 5 different clients. Ray had also seen to it that the temporary camp provided almost as many comforts as did the permanent camp on his hunting concession, and it was this attention to detail which now amazed the young client. Okay, looks like you're settled in and you know where everything is. Let's see this bloody cannon I've been hearing so much about. Ray Johnson, raised in Colorado and educated in Boston, had adopted some of the phraseology of his current Rhodesian peers. "God damn," he said with feeling when Henry opened the aluminum case he had made for his 4-bore double rifle. "Makes my 600 Holland look like a matchstick." "Yeah, I know what you mean," Henry said with a sigh. "I used to shoot those medium bores, too, till I got this. That's why I left my 5.77 at home." Both men started laughing. "Go ahead," Henry urged with a nod. Ray Johnson lifted the rifle and threw it to his shoulder. "Balance is great," he said immediately. "I only have 25 rounds for it," Henry admitted. "Is that enough?" "Lord, I hope so. This isn't the only gun you brought, I trust." Henry smiled and shook his head. "Look at that," Ray exclaimed when he saw the ammunition. It looked like something for a turn-of-the-century field piece. "Got a 375 Ackley improved for the small stuff, and a 500 Buchmiller for elephant and buffalo, if I get tired of lugging this boat anchor around. Speaking of which, I'd like to make sure the scope on my 375 didn't change any in transit. Where can I set up some 200-yard targets?" Ray lifted his eyebrows. In 15 years, Henry was only the second client he'd encountered who had wanted to check his sights before going afield. The first had been Max Collins. Don't you want to take a nap first? Your system must be thrown off some with the time change. No, not right now. I'm still too keyed up about being here, to be honest. Well, let me have Kineas get some lunch together for us, and then I'll show you where you can shoot your light rifle. Fresh salad, fresh tomatoes, fresh baked bread, and roasted guinea fowl hen sound all right? Sounds delicious. Kineas can grill you a steak if you'd prefer that. Maybe for dinner. Good. I'll have one of the boys find something you can use for a target, Ray offered. Oh, I brought targets. Oh, hell. Ray Johnson raised his eyebrows. I have a feeling this is going to be a really good hunt, he thought with a smile. Later, you didn't bring a shotgun, did you? Ray asked as they stopped under a tree beside the fire road 15 miles from camp. The sun was bright, and Ray recommended regular breaks to ingest fluids. They had parked the Land Rover and had been walking for about 2 hours. Henry had seen several zebra, which were not on his ticket, and almost 100 impala since leaving the vehicle. No, I don't shoot shotguns. Why? Oh, that's a pity. There's a lot of good wing shooting in Africa, especially guinea fowl, like we had for lunch, he said, nodding towards some birds in the distance. A lot of them in this area. They're like small turkeys, 8 to 10 pounds. Take a lot of killing, though. Last client I had who brought a shotgun only had skeet loads with him. They'd have been okay for doves, but guinea fowl, it just made him squawk and keep flying. Number 8s won't do it. You need 4s at least, he said as he took a drink from his canteen. Wouldn't the noise spook the other game? Henry asked as he watched the birds fly towards them. Ray laughed. Not Plains game. There's so much of it in this area you could detonate a bomb and you'd still find more a mile farther on. Henry thought about that and looked at the eyepiece of the Leopold variable on his 375 Ackley Magnum. The scope was one of the new models in 1.5 by 5 power, with the dot reticle that Henry preferred. He noted with satisfaction that the power ring at the front of the eyepiece was set to the lowest power. Henry pulled a single earplug from the breast pocket of his khaki shirt and slipped it into his left ear. Hold your ears, he said softly, as he held his rifle at port arms and watched the 4 guinea fowl fly towards the trees that he and the others stood under. The lead bird was to the left of the 3 that followed it. 30 yards, maybe less in a second. Dead on at 30, half-inch low at 20, Henry said. Henry threw the Enfield Action 375 to his shoulder and flicked the safety forward to disengage it. He squeezed the trigger a practiced amount, then increased the pressure when the dot in the center of the crosshairs was about 2 inches in front of the bird's head. As the muzzle blast rolled out over the Rhodesian plains and the gun rose in recoil, Henry Bowman slapped the bolt handle up and to the rear, then shoved it forward and down as he pulled the rifle back on target. The rifle's stock obscured his face, but he was smiling. The 3 other guinea fowl reacted simultaneously to the shot. 2 of them broke left, but one started to turn to Henry's right, spotted the 4 men under the trees, and wheeled left to join its compatriots. The 3 other guinea fowl reacted simultaneously to the shot. 2 of them broke left, but one started to turn to Henry's right, spotted the 4 men under the trees, and wheeled left to join the other birds. Henry swung on this one, and felt the trigger break just as the dot reticle passed through an imaginary spot 4 inches in front of and just slightly above the bird's beak. As the rubber recoil pad hammered his shoulder once again, Henry relaxed and watched the second corpse fall out of the sky. "Jesus!" Ray Johnson exclaimed. "Banda, grab those," he said unnecessarily. The head tracker was already jogging out to retrieve the dead birds. "I've certainly never had a client do that," Ray said to Henry, as he alternated his stares between the rifle in Henry's hands and the area out in the dry grass where the dead birds had fallen. A 270 Nosler at 2900 doesn't have the problem of insufficient power that skeet loads do. Henry said happily. Probably blew the meat all to shit, Ray said, in a tone that made it clear that he didn't care at all if each entire bird was now inedible. We'll see. Henry shrugged. The tracker returned a few moments later with both guinea fowl and held them out for inspection. The professional hunter was stunned to see that the meat was not damaged at all. Using a bolt-action rifle that most people thought of as an elephant gun, Raymond Johnson's newest client had decapitated both birds in flight with 2 perfect headshots. Exactly how is it you ended up a professional hunter out here anyway? Henry asked as they sat at the dinner table and worked on their salads. Didn't Uncle Max tell me you were originally a lawyer or something? Ray smiled. Yeah, I had a job in New York doing securities law 15 years ago. Lucked into an unusual personal injury case where the defendant was a big company about to be bought out by a conglomerate. We settled out of court for a bunch of money so it wouldn't queer the sale. I took some of the money from my cut and went out on safari in Kenya. While I was there, I got a cable that my dad had had a heart attack while driving with my mother, and they'd both been killed in the wreck. I finished up my hunt and then went home to settle the estate. I realized that I wasn't looking forward to going back and living in New York and poring over prospectuses. Guy I'd been with in Kenya had said there were some good opportunities in Angola and Mozambique for a guy who knew a bit about game. I settled things in the States and went to Angola. That's where I met your uncle. Do you have any brothers or sisters? Raymond shook his head. No. Only other family I had was my dad's brother, Uncle Carl. He and Dad both ran the ranch in Colorado. Is it still there? Yeah, my uncle still runs it, Ray said, nodding his head. I still own the half that belonged to my father. Dad had enough savings and insurance to pay the estate tax due at the time. That was back in 1963. I told Uncle Carl since he was going to have to hire more help, and I was fixed okay for money. He was welcome to all the profits so long as Dad's land stayed in my name. He knew I didn't have any urge to sell. So you've got a bunch of land in Colorado to retire to if things go to shit over here, eh? Well, yeah, that and a mutual fund I bought with my settlement money. Dollars cost averaged over 5 years and wrapped in an annuity contract so it would grow tax-deferred. Henry nodded in understanding and sipped his lemonade. Whoever told you to do that was smart. Feds slammed the doors on that one a few years back, but guys who were in already got grandfathered. Tony Kearns, my broker, was really good, Ray agreed. So, is it what you expected? He asked, changing the subject. The game plentiful enough for you? Henry had shot a good-sized impala at a little over 200 yards and a nice wildebeest at about half that distance. But the professional hunter was still thinking of the flying birds he had seen his client kill that morning. Better than I ever imagined. I can't tell you what I was expecting exactly, but it wasn't this good. Not by a jugful. He looked thoughtful for a moment, remembering how astonished he had been at regularly spotting elephant and rhino that afternoon. How many elephants did you say there were in Africa, Ray? Well, last estimate about 1.25 million. That's what astonishes every one of my clients from the United States. Apparently, there's some crazy rumor over there that because of all the hunting, African elephants are nearly extinct. A lot of people seem to think that, Henry admitted. Raymond laughed, then turned serious. No one likes to say it out loud, but it comes down to the simple question of which do you like better, African elephants or Africans? He took a bite of his salad and continued. That's why every country over here has game department people on the payroll whose job it is to go kill hundreds of elephants a year. Whole herds of them, babies and all. I guess a lot of the American public flunked arithmetic. What you mean by that? Well, a full-grown elephant eats about 400 pounds of vegetation a day. That means that, per elephant, you need between 5 and 25 square miles of free grazing area, depending on the country and how good the soil is. That's just to sustain the animals at existing levels. Got a little problem there, though. It's called people. They have this nasty habit of wanting to own their own property and plant crops on it, and raise cattle and stay alive. Those goals are not particularly compatible with having elephants and rhino and lions sharing the same real estate. You said in the summers you grew up on a place out in the country, right? Yeah, that's right. Cattle, chickens, pigs, corn, like that, all fenced in? Yeah. Your mother have a vegetable garden? Raymond asked. Of course. Any groundhogs ever get in it? This elicited a nod. So what'd you do? Shot 'em, Henry said. Right. Well, imagine that instead of weighing 10 pounds, those groundhogs you wanted to keep out of your fields weighed 10,000 pounds. And each one of them ate 400 pounds of your crops every day it was alive. Imagine instead of building a fence to keep the cattle and pigs in, you had to build one that would keep lions and leopards out, and also keep them away from where your children might happen to be. Good luck, he said with feeling. Any place here in Africa where the people want to grow crops, all the elephant and rhino have to be exterminated first. Any place people want to have beef or dairy cattle, or raise children for that matter, all the cats have to be killed off. Every last one of them. He smiled sadly. Like if you were in Florida, send a dozen guys off into the swamp to kill as many alligators as they can. 10 years later, there'll be plenty of alligators in that swamp. But drain the swamp and pour concrete for a new A&P, there'll never be another alligator there again. So you're telling me there's a big push to divide up the government land for the residents? Henry asked. Ray Johnson nodded. With the trophy fees as high as they are, the raw land brings in enough money that the government can afford to leave huge sections of it well enough alone. Continued profitable hunting businesses keep the land undeveloped. And that's good for photo safaris, too. The photo people don't spend any money out here, but they do a lot for the tourism in the cities. One client I had brought his girlfriend on the hunt. She wanted to know why people couldn't just take pictures of the game and have no more hunting. I asked her if she'd be willing to pay $100 to the government for every picture she took of an impala, and $3,000 for every elephant, on top of paying for her transport over here and $400 a day for my services. She looked at me like I'd lost my fucking mind. Small wonder that. The whole system usually goes to shit when they outlaw hunting. That's what we've seen in the other countries, at least. Looks like it might happen to us with all this crap that's going on. He was referring to the civil war in Rhodesia that had been going on for several years. Do you think that will happen here? Henry asked. Dunno. A lot of people are leaving, mostly for South Africa. What I do will depend on if the government decides to outlaw hunting and kill off the game to make way for 100-acre farms. No read on that yet. Henry nodded. He took a drink of water and finished off his salad as Caneus set a thick steak down in front of him. The talk soon returned to the events of the day's hunt and what was expected for the following morning. Political discussion was shelved for the time being, but the issues were ones Henry would ponder for the remainder of his trip. Okay, how's our audio sounding? We still good? Hallelujah. This being recorded at 12:09 a.m. on Tuesday, February 11th, 2025 now. Major changes were in store for Rhodesia. The asset-based qualification for voting would be abolished, and full independence with majority rule, along with a name change for the country from Rhodesia to Zimbabwe, would occur in 1980. As many had predicted, this event would immediately lead to a move towards a single-party government. 5 years after Henry's safari, Rhodesia's most productive citizens would have emigrated to South Africa. Hotels in the major cities, which had averaged 80% occupancy throughout the course of a year, would be down to 15% in the tourist season. The government would levy a 17% tariff on all retail sales in a fruitless effort to tax the country into prosperity. These events would force the new leaders to recognize that hunting was one of their country's few remaining assets capable of attracting foreign dollars. Hunting concessions would still be leased to those people willing to risk a business venture in an environment largely hostile to capitalism. The handwriting was on the wall, however, and by the time the country became a one-party state in 1988, Ray Johnson would be long gone. New chapter here. We are recording this section at 12:11 a.m., shortly after midnight, on Tuesday, February 11th, 2025. Here at the top of page 334 of the ebook edition, corresponding to page 386 of the hardcover edition, we have Chapter 110, Elephant with a Forebore, dated September 5th, 1978. Let's watch them for a bit, Henry requested. Sure, we'll glass them from here for a while, see if one of them's got a decent pair of teeth. Ray, Henry, the lead tracker, and 2 tracker skinners were looking across a canyon at 4 elephants on the other hillside, about a quarter-mile away. One of the bulls was pushing his head against a 12-inch diameter tree. Watch how he pushes and releases it, then pushes again, getting it rocking. He's going to get it moving further and further until he snaps it off at ground level. Henry watched, fascinated, and just as Ray had predicted, in less than a minute the tree went all the way over, and a long cracking sound reached his ears a second later. Why do they do that? Henry asked. No one knows. The explanation everyone uses is that the elephants do it to test their strength. They do it all the time. Just look around at all the trees pushed over. Henry nodded. Why do they do that? Henry asked. No one knows. The explanation everyone uses is that the elephants do it to test their strength. They do it all the time. Just look around at all the trees pushed over. Henry nodded. He was imagining a farmer trying to build something to keep elephants away from his crops. A 2-foot-thick poured concrete wall, maybe? He thought with amusement. See that third one from the left? His tusks are about as big as you are going to find, at least in this area. Look like 50, maybe 55 aside from here. Want to finish that canteen, take a few pictures, and see if we can swing around and approach them from downwind? Give your Rhoda a workout? Sounds good to me. Ray Johnson got his client to within 15 yards of the huge animal. He had advised Henry to avoid letting the elephant see his eyes. Henry didn't know if this was a superstition or if his eyes really could give him away, like the glint off the lenses of an enemy's binoculars. He kept them shielded with his free hand just in case. Henry had told Ray he'd take a heart shot to see how well that would work using the huge 19th century rifle. He kept them shielded with his free hand just in case. Henry had told Ray he'd take a heart shot to see how well that would work using the huge 19th century rifle. Henry Bowman pulled the front trigger and held it down while drawing back the right hammer. He held the hammer to the rear as he released the trigger, then let go of the hammer spur as well. He didn't like to carry the 4-bore cocked and ready to fire, and hammer guns could be cocked in complete silence by using the method Henry had just employed. He glanced at Ray Johnson, nodded once, and threw the 25-pound rifle to his shoulder. The animal was standing broadside to Henry, facing to the young man's right. When the front sight bead covered the proper spot on the elephant's side, Henry Bowman gripped the gun's wrist and forend with all his strength, leaned forward, and squeezed the trigger. The trackers, standing 50 yards to the rear, near some eminently climbable trees, smiled involuntarily. The huge rifle made a sound like no other whenever it went off. Henry Bowman rocked backwards, brought the rifle down out of recoil, and thumped back the hammer of the left barrel. He made no effort to do it silently this time. The elephant had taken 2 steps, stopped, and turned around so that Henry was now presented with its left side. Did I miss the heart? Henry wondered in amazement as he took aim again. The bull was standing still, and Henry saw a brown spot of dirt or other discoloration on the animal's skin in the proper area for another heart shot. When the front sight bead obscured it, Henry pulled the Rada's rear trigger. He was again rocked back under recoil, only this time Henry let go of the wrist of the stock, grabbed the knob of the underlever, and swung the lever to the side as he brought the gun down across his left knee, breaking it open. He could tell with his peripheral vision that the elephant was still standing. I can't be flinching that badly, he thought for an instant, then closed his mind to all but the task at hand. Without looking up, Henry plucked the 2 empty cases from the barrels, dropped them at his feet, and pulled a pair of cartridges out of a surgical elastic carrier he wore on his left forearm. He slid them into the chambers, swung the barrels shut, closed the underlever, cocked the right hammer, and threw the rifle to his shoulder just in time to see the bull elephant fall over on his side, dead. Henry glanced at Raymond, who was holding his .458 in one hand at his side, grinning. He pulled the right hammer back, held back the front trigger, and let the hammer down gently. He could feel the blood pumping in his ears as he walked over and stood by the huge head of the dead creature. Henry laid his hand on the thick hide just over the eye. He felt a much stronger emotion now than he ever felt after shooting any other game animal. Ray and the men recognized this. They had seen it before. The 4 of them stood silently and kept a respectful distance. "I don't know what happened," Henry said finally. "What do you mean?" "I must have missed with the first shot. A vital organ, I mean. Not the whole elephant. He didn't go down. He went down faster than I've seen with a heart shot. They usually walk 100 yards or so before they fall down." "What?" "Elephant's heart's bigger than a basketball," Ray said as he walked towards the dead bull. "Put a little pencil-sized hole in it, you'll kill the animal, but not instantly. You were talking about the Guinness Book, remember? That huge bull shot in Angola in 1955 that's mounted in the Smithsonian Museum?" "Yeah." "That one took 3 full magazines from a .416 Rigby. You don't think 11 of those shots were all in non-vital. Hey, look." Raymond was pointing to the dead animal's hide. 2 one-inch holes overlapped, with the right one more ragged than the left. "My God, that's an exit wound," Henry exclaimed suddenly, realizing that his first shot had penetrated 6 feet of elephant, torn through the inch-thick hide on the far side, and then sailed off over the bush. "I thought it was a spot of dirt. I used it for an aiming point." "With some success," the professional hunter said dryly. Ray smiled to himself. Henry was staring at the hole in the hide and thinking about his 19th century rifle's amazing penetration. Every other client he'd ever had would be examining the ivory, trying to estimate its weight. "Damn. Do you think the second shot also went through?" Henry asked, mostly to himself. "Want to help the Skinners check?" Ray asked, joking. "Oh, hell yeah!" "Better take your shoes off and roll up your pants then, eh?" Half an hour later, Henry Bowman was knee-deep in elephant entrails. He found the elephant's heart and saw how it was indeed larger than a basketball. The organ had sustained massive trauma from the 2 4-bore slugs that had torn through its center from opposite sides. Henry tracked the path of the second bullet, poking through the vast quantity of elephant guts to determine exactly where it had gone. He found that after the slug had passed through the heart, it had clipped a rib on the off side. He pushed his fingers through the jagged break in the bone, through the flesh on the side, until he found the inside of the hide. There was a hole in it, and when Henry pushed his fingers through it, he touched the hard surface of rock. "I'm all the way through to the ground," Henry announced. Second shot went clear through, too. He stood up and began to wipe his arms and legs off with a rag that one of the Skinners handed him. "Did you want to finish butchering him?" Raymond asked in amusement. "No, I'm just a typical lazy client." Nah, I'm just a typical lazy client. I'm good. Ray Johnson translated the comment into Swahili for the Skinners, and they all started laughing. New chapter here. Current recording time is 12:24 a.m. on Tuesday, February 11th, 2025. I probably have maybe one more of these in me. I want to finish off the whole Safari Gambit before we call it a night. So, let's give it our best shot, shall we? It's a long way from LA to Denver. It's a long time hanging in the sky. It's a long way home from Star Grove in Aspen. Catch a sweet Rocky Mountain paradise. That's a sweet Rocky Mountain paradise. How is my audio going? I really hope it is okay. Christ on a crutch. I have work at 4:30 in the morning. It's gonna be a long night. Alright, fuck it. This is still worth my time. Alright. New chapter here. Here at the top of page 336 of the ebook edition, corresponding to page 389 of the hardcover edition, we have Chapter 111, Switching Rifles, dated September 7th, 1978. Beginning now. September 7th, 1978. Ray Johnson opened his mouth to speak, then thought better of it. Henry can decide whether to shoot or not, he thought. Henry Bowman had walked on ahead 15 yards as they had climbed the hill, and was now silently cocking the right hammer of his 4-bore Rhoda. Ray motioned the trackers to stay put and crouched down before moving to join his client. On the other side of the small rise were 3 buffalo bulls. All were large, but the nearest one was exceptional. Ray judged it to be about 1,800 pounds. It was broadside to them at a distance of less than 25 yards. Henry swung the rifle to his shoulder, and the right barrel thundered. At the sound, the other 2 bulls ran away and to the left, up a slight incline. The buffalo Henry had shot ran with considerable effort to the right. By the time Henry had pulled the big rifle out of recoil and cocked the left hammer, the animal was 40 yards away. "I saw your shot. You went right through the lungs. You don't need..." Ray's advice was cut off by the tremendous muzzle blast of the left barrel of Henry's rifle. Damn, but that's a cannon, Ray thought. The buffalo did a somersault and landed on its back, dead. You didn't need that second shot, Raymond reproached his client. He wouldn't have lasted 100 yards. What, are you trying to lower my ammo costs on this hunt? Henry asked. I'm tired of shooting these game animals in the right spot with the largest rifle ever made and then having to wait for them to get the message that they're dead. It's very unnerving. Fair enough. Where was that second shot? I couldn't tell. Right hip. Probably got enough penetration to get into the lungs, too. The Rhoda once again exceeded expectations. When the crew got to the big Cape Buffalo and examined it, they discovered that the first shot had gone in the right side, straight through the center of the lungs and out the left side, leaving a 1-inch hole after traversing almost 4 feet of flesh. The second shot, as the bull was quartering away, had been even more impressive. It smashed the buffalo's right hip and continued forward, ripping a path through the heart and finally coming to rest under the hide in front of the bull's shoulder. The 4.5-ounce slug from the 100-year-old rifle had pulverized a massive bone, and then gone on through 5 feet of muscle. All 5 of the men were very impressed when they saw what the old gun had done, and they took several photos to document the event. Well, Henry said as he and Ray watched the trackers gut the animal in preparation for winching it into the Land Rover. I hate to be a wimp, but it's been a week now, and I'm getting a little tired of lugging this boat anchor around. You're gonna stop using the 4-bore? Ray asked in mock horror. In truth, he had been very impressed that Henry had carried it almost all day, every day. You're going to stop using the 4-bore? Ray asked in mock horror. In truth, he had been very impressed that Henry had carried it almost all day, every day, relinquishing it for his 375 Holland & Holland only when Plains game was immediately present. You can have one of the trackers carry it for you, he suggested. No, I like having my main gun in my hands. And I wouldn't wish a 25-pound gun on anyone who didn't get to shoot it at game. He looked down at his big rifle and grinned. I've shot 2 elephants and 2 buffalo with it so far. That'll do for now. I'm going to start carrying my 500 Buchmiller. At least for a few days. 12-pound gun's going to feel like a featherweight by comparison. In 2 days, Henry was going to be glad he had made the decision to switch rifles. New chapter here. Alright, this is going to be our final section for this chapter, I think. Or... No, actually, I'll finish off all the Ray Johnson stuff, I think. I'll take it all the way to 342. Okay. New chapter here. I'm going to cut this here and see how the sound quality is. Go drink some water. Take a break. Total unedited audio here for this section appears to be about 2 hours, 41 minutes, and 50 some odd seconds now. So pausing here. End time for this recording session is 12:33 a.m. on Tuesday, February 11th, 2025. I'm gonna cut this here, take a break, and resume tomorrow afternoon after work. Auf Wiedersehen, y'all. And there... And now I have to pause this again.